What we're looking at here is a failed attempt at a raised bed. It was going to be a vegetable garden, but it was poorly constructed. Strength was not a factor here. And really, the point of a raised garden is to facilitate drainage and have good soil. This is the same old clay soil that was here before the box was put in. There's no point for the box at all. And in fact, when a garden isn't successful, it's not easy to take care of. People tend not to take care of it. And the result is a chaotic mess like this. Look at how this was put together. The timbers are simply abutted. They should be overlapping like a log cabin. And they should be staked down to the ground so that they don't move even a little bit. This will be a job. We'll get rid of the weeds first, and then we'll proceed to build a raised planter box that'll really work. We'll be adding a lot of soil amendments to this and building up the soil, but all these weeds can be green manure or organic matter for the soil, so we'll till it all under later. What we'd like to do is build a perfectly square 16-foot by 16-foot box. We've taken a stake and driven it in at each corner. We've tied strings to it, and the way that we're going to check the box to make sure that it's square is to measure the diagonals. If both diagonals are equal, we know we have a square box. The other thing we've done is we've measured the distance from the box to the fence. I've made it exactly 7.5 feet. That gives me plenty of room to get a mower through here if I need to. And now we're ready to put in our first timber. Remember, our other box wasn't built very solidly. This one will be. I've shaved off a little soil with my spade at that end to make sure that I've got this timber very level, both level this way and level this way. And in order to keep it that way, I'm going to drill 3 3/8-inch holes through it and hammer these pieces of rebar through. The 2 on the ends will be driven through at an angle like this, and I'll put one in the middle at the opposite angle. That'll keep the timber from rocking one way or the other. As we go up this slope, the timbers are going to want to go up the slope as well. But we want our timbers to stay level. So if that means digging soil out and burying the end of the timber in the ground, we'll do it. Now, as I've attached successive layers of timbers, I've leveled them not only this way, but also the outside of the box has to be plumb as well. If it isn't, as the box gets taller and taller, it'll look really crooked. Now, as we work our way up the slope, you can see that the timber, in order to stay level, has gone right into the ground. What I'll have to do now is lay an 8-footer on top of this one and bury that in the ground so that it too is level as I work my way up the slope. And the thing to do now is to shave some sod out from under it. We've reached the uphill end of our planter box. This timber will actually form the top layer, even though it's partially embedded in the ground. All the other timbers will be level with this one. This one, being partly embedded, will allow us easy access in and out of the garden with our lawn and garden equipment, like our rototillers and wheelbarrows and whatnot. The other end of the box, of course, will be quite a bit higher. When we're done, we'll have a well-drained, well-defined planter box. This is going to make a fine garden space. 16 by 16 ought to be big enough for any family. Next step is to till under all this grass and weeds and add sand and peat moss, humus and steer manure. By the time we get this done, we'll have a level bed that'll grow anything you want to grow. And that makes gardening fun. I've finished my raised bed. And now what I'm going to do is get ready to plant vegetables in it. But if you're going to do something like this, whether it's planting a lawn, a flower garden, or a vegetable garden, a good and an intelligent place to start is with a soil test. And here's a way to take it. Dig a hole 6 to 8 inches deep and then shave the side off the hole. Take a spade and take a thin layer of that soil all the way down and send that to your local state extension service. They'll mail you test results. It's a small fee, but well worth it. The results will show you what you need to add to grow a specific crop. I told them I was going to build a vegetable garden. My pH is too low, so I need to add lime. My organic matter is way too low. I need to add more organic matter. And today, I'm going to show you just how to do that. This tiller of mine goes about 8 inches deep, and that's what I'm looking for, good depth. What I want to do is till under all the grass and weeds, get that thoroughly dead. It'll add to the organic matter, and then I'm going to start adding my soil amendments, peat moss, manure, humus, even the limestone. And what I'm going to do is till a bit, add a layer of organic matter, till it in again. That mixes it as deeply into the soil as possible. It also builds up the soil in depth. As you can see, I've built my box level, and I want to add enough soil and organic matter to make a level garden bed. Once we've got all the grass and weeds tilled in, it's time to add our layers of organic matter. Peat moss, humus, steer manure, all of that improves soil porosity, soil drainage, and at the same time helps to hold moisture and nutrients in the soil. What we want to do is get about a 2-inch layer at a time and then till that in, and then we'll be ready to add our next layer. You may wonder why I'm adding topsoil instead of just peat moss and humus and other soil amendments. The addition of topsoil adds clay, silt, and sand particles to the soil. And those are nothing more than particle sizes of crushed rock. And that's good because the crushed rock actually contains as well as holds nutrients. The peat moss and the organic matter, on the other hand, improve aeration and drainage and actually hold water better. So both are necessary. If we mix them in the right proportions, what we'll wind up with is called a loam soil, and that'd be great for the garden. As you can see, by adding alternating layers of organic matter and topsoil, we've greatly increased the volume of our garden. It's now level, and in fact, it's ready to plant, except for one thing. We're applying lime. What lime does to the soil is raise the pH. We find that most vegetable garden plants do best at a pH of about 6.5, and this soil started at 5. Limestone will bring it up. And when we're done with that, the only thing we have left to do is plant the garden. Ah, what nice soil. Look at that. We've worked with this soil. We've added humus and cow manure. We've added peat moss and sand and worked it up really well. And what we have now is a nice, loose, loamy, rich bed for a garden. Most people plant gardens early in the spring, and that's a good thing because things like broccoli and cauliflower do very well when the weather is cool. But we can also plant them later in the summer, and they'll mature in September and October when the weather is cool once again. Other plants like tomatoes, beans, and cucumbers like warmer soils, and we can plant them now too. The important thing is the days to maturity. Just make sure you have enough time before the first killing frost for your crop to mature. In this case, we do. Now the first thing we want to do is plant a row of cauliflower. Now when I'm planting rows in the garden, I like to get them nice and straight, and that's why I put a string out. And I like to plant my plants an even interval apart, in this case 18 inches. You'll notice that on my rake I've got marks at 1-foot intervals. That helps me get the plants exactly where I want them. And when I pick the spot to plant it, I like to leave my plants in a bucket of water. The reason is that gets them good and wet, and I don't have to water them right away as I plant them. in this dry soil, they could dry out before I get back to watering them. But soaked like this, they can set in this dry soil for a couple of hours before I water the whole garden all at once. That keeps me from getting so muddy. And here's a good idea about planting tomatoes. Most people, when they plant tomatoes, simply dig a hole and plant the plant upright. I use a method called trench planting. I dig a long, fairly deep trench and lay in a little fertilizer in the bottom of the trench. I use a fertilizer with a high second and third number. In this case, I've got some 6-24-24. And then I take my tomato plant and lay it sideways in the hole. Prune off the branches, and roots will develop all along this trunk. And this plant will take off in a hurry, virtually jump out of the ground growing. But this is the only part of it that we're going to see when we're done planting. As we fill it in, roots will grow from that stem down into that layer of fertilizer, and this plant will do terrific. We'll water it in thoroughly when we're done. And now, let's build a trellis for those plants in the garden that like climbing. What I'm doing now is putting up a trellis. It's ordinary chicken wire, a few pieces of 3/8 rebar, and it's for those plants that like to climb on some kind of a trellis. You know, cucumbers, maybe peas. What I'll do next is run a furrow out here, plant my seeds, they'll get out here, find the trellis and climb right to the top and be here at the back of the garden. And of course, if I'd run the trellis all the way around the garden, it'd help keep the rabbits out. Now when you're planting peas, the recommended spacing is 2 inches between the plants and 1 inch to 1.5 inches depth. On the other hand, when we're planting most plants, we want to take them down deep enough that the soil is up to their lowest leaves. And when we're all done planting, we'll turn on the sprinkler and water it all at once. And speaking of vegetable plants, here's a young tomato plant that already has developing tomatoes on it. You'd think this would be a good buy, you're getting ahead of the game, but you're not. If a young tomato plant already has fruits on it, it's because the plant is under stress and it's trying to reproduce. Leave this one at the garden center. Don't put it in your garden. And when you're all done planting, sit back and enjoy the best part, my favorite part, watching the sprinkler.